along a quiet rural highway in Texas. A passing driver spotted something unusual. Two bobcat kittens on the roadside. One lay motionless, injured, but the other refuses to leave, standing guard and resting its head protectively across its sibling's body. Wildlife vet Dr. Emily Carter was called to the scene and arrived just in time. It was clear the healthy one was guarding its brother, almost pleading for help. She had. Dr. Carter gently scooped them up and rushed them to her clinic. This is the extraordinary true story of guardian and brave, two bobcat siblings whose bond would not only save their lives, but forever change how we understand love in the wild. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across Highway 287 about 30 m outside of Amarillo, Texas. Margaret Whitfield, a retired school teacher in her 70s, was driving her old Ford pickup toward town for her weekly grocery run when something caught her. At first, she thought it was just roadkill, an unfortunately common sight on these rural Texas highways. But as she drew closer, she noticed movement. Margaret slowed her truck and pulled onto the shoulder, her heart already beginning to race. Through her dusty windshield, she could see two small forms on the gravel beside the asphalt. One was lying still, but the other was very much alive, its tawny fur catching the early light as it moved in small, desperate circles around its companion. "Oh Lord," Margaret whispered, putting the truck in park and reaching for her cell phone with trembling hands. Aid lived in rural Texas all her life and knew better than to approach wild animals, especially predators like bobcats. But she couldn't just drive away. The healthy kitten, for that's what they were, she realized, just babies, was doing something that made her eyes well with tears. It was lying down beside its sibling, draping its small body protectively over the injured one, occasionally nudging it with its nose as if trying to wake it. When a passing 18-wheeler rumbled by, the healthy kitten pressed itself lower, shielding its sibling from the wind and debris. Margaret dialed information and asked for the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center. After 2 transfers, she finally reached Dr. Emily Carter's wildlife clinic in Canyon, about 45 minutes away. There are 2 bobcat kittens on Highway 287, Margaret explained, her voice shaking. "One's hurt bad, maybe hit by a car. The other one won't leave it. I've never seen anything like it, doctor. That little one is trying to protect its sibling." Dr. Emily Carter had been a wildlife veterinarian for 15 years, but the urgency in the elderly woman's voice made her grab her emergency kit without hesitation. "Can you stay there and make sure no one disturbs them? I'm leaving right now." "I'm not going anywhere," Margaret said firmly. "These babies need help." For the next 40 minutes, Margaret sat in her truck, hazard lights blinking, watching over the 2 small forms. Several cars slowed to look, and she waved them on. A state trooper stopped to check on her, and she explained the situation. He nodded, understanding, and said he'd wait with her until the vet arrived. "Never seen a bobcat do that," Officer Daniel Reeves said, leaning against Margaret's truck and watching the kittens through binoculars. "Usually, they're solitary creatures. Even siblings separate pretty young. These 2 are different," Margaret said softly. "That healthy one hasn't moved. more than a few inches from its sibling. This whole time, keeps licking its face, like it's trying to comfort it. When Dr. Carter's white van finally appeared on the horizon, both Margaret and Officer Reeves felt a surge of relief. The veterinarian, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and steady hands, quickly assessed the situation from a distance before approaching with a carrier and thick gloves. "Hey there, little ones," Emily spoke in a soft, soothing voice as she slowly approached. The healthy kitten raised its head, yellow eyes wide with fear and defiance. It made a small hissing sound, but didn't flee. Instead, it pressed itself more firmly against its sibling. "It's okay, sweetheart," Emily continued, moving with practiced calm. "I'm here to help." What happened next would stay with everyone present for the rest of their lives. As Emily reached for the injured kitten, the healthy one didn't attack or run. Instead, it made a sound, not quite a meow, not quite a cry, that was unmistakably pleading. It looked directly at Emily, then at its sibling, then back at Emily as if saying, "Please, help us." Emily gently scooped up the injured kitten first, quickly examining it. The little one was unconscious, but breathing with an obviously fractured rear leg and some road rash. As she placed it carefully in the carrier, the healthy kitten followed every movement with intense focus. "Come on, brave one," Emily said, reaching for the second kitten. "You can come too. I promise I'll take care of both of you." The healthy kitten allowed itself to be picked up without resistance, immediately trying to crawl toward its sibling in the carrier. Emily placed them together, and the healthy one immediately curled around the injured one, resuming its protective position. "I've never seen anything like it," Officer Reeves said, shaking his head in amazement. "Neither have I," Emily admitted, securing the carrier in her van. "And I've been doing this for 15 years. Margaret wiped tears from her cheeks. "You'll call me. Let me know how they're doing." "Of course," Emily promised, taking down Margaret's number. "You probably saved both their lives by calling when you did." The drive back to the clinic was tense. Emily could hear the healthy kitten making soft chirping sounds to its sibling, and she pressed a little harder on the accelerator. At her clinic, she immediately took both kittens into the examination room. The injured kitten, a male, she determined, had a fractured tibia, multiple abrasions, and a mild concussion. The healthy one, a female, was completely uninjured, but severely dehydrated and underweight. Both were about 4 months old, just at the age when bobcat siblings would typically begin to separate in the wild. "But you two aren't typical, are you?" Emily murmured as she prepared the male for surgery. The female kitten watched every move with those intense yellow eyes. When Emily had to separate them to take the male into surgery, the female began crying, a heartbreaking sound that echoed through the clinic. Emily's veterinary assistant, Jake Morrison, a young man fresh out of school, stayed with the female trying to comfort her. "She won't eat," Jake reported an hour into the surgery. "Won't drink either. Just sits at the edge of the cage, staring at the door." The surgery went well. Emily managed to pin the fractured bone, clean and stitch the wounds, and start the male on antibiotics and pain medication. When she brought him back, still unconscious from the anesthesia, and placed him in the recovery cage, the female immediately rushed to him, sniffing him all over before curling up against him, purring loudly. That's when I knew Emily would later tell people these two weren't just siblings. They were bonded in a way I'd never seen in wild animals. Over the next few days, the male kitten, whom Jake had started calling Brave, and the female Guardian, slowly recovered. Guardian never left his side except to eat and use the litter box. And even then, she would cry until she could return to him. When Brave finally opened his eyes 3 days after the accident, the first thing he saw was his sister's face, and he immediately began purring. Despite the pain he must have been feeling, Emily found herself spending more and more time with the pair, fascinated by their bond. She'd cared for hundreds of wild animals over the years, always with the goal of releasing them back to the wild. But these two presented a unique challenge. They're too humanized now, she explained to Jake one evening as they watched the kittens play. Brave's leg was healing well, and he'd started putting weight on it. Guardian let us handle her to save her brother. That's not normal Bobcat behavior. And Brave is too comfortable with us now, too. So, what do we do? Jake asked. Emily had been wrestling with that question for days. Releasing them seemed cruel. They'd lost their natural fear of humans, which could be dangerous for them. Sending them to a zoo or sanctuary would mean cages for the rest of their lives. And then there was their bond to consider. I've been thinking, Emily said slowly. I have those 10 acres behind my house, all fenced. It's where I've rehabbed other animals before releasing them. What if I kept them? Not as pets, exactly, but as wild residents. They could have freedom to roam, but with the safety of the fence and regular food. Jake's face lit up. That's perfect. They'd have each other in space to be wild, but also be safe. The decision made, Emily began preparing her property. She reinforced the fencing, built several shelters throughout the acreage, and installed cameras so she could monitor the kittens as they grew. Margaret Whitfield, who had called weekly to check on the kittens, donated money for their care, as did Officer Reeves and several other people who had heard the story. The day Emily brought Brave and Guardian to their new home was both exciting and nerve-wracking. She opened the carrier at the edge of her back porch, then stepped back to give them space. Guardian emerged first, cautiously, her eyes scanning the new environment. Then she turned back and made that same chirping sound she'd used on the highway. Brave limped out. His leg was healed, but would always have a slight limp, and pressed against his sister. For several minutes they simply sat there, taking it all in. Then Guardian took a few steps forward, looked back at Brave, and waited. He followed, and together they began to explore their new territory. They'll probably avoid the house, Emily told Jake, who had come to help with the transition. Give them a few weeks and they'll be completely wild. Again, just safe. But the Bobcats had other plans. That first night, Emily was awakened by a sound on her back porch. She looked out to see both kittens curled up on the old porch swing, Guardian grooming Brave's ears. Every evening after that, as the sun set, they would return to the porch as if checking in. Months passed and the kittens grew into magnificent young adults. Their coats thickened, their muscles developed, and they became skilled hunters. Emily often found evidence of their catches throughout the property, but They never lost their bond with each other or their strange trust in Emily. "They're wild," Emily would explain to visitors who were amazed to see two bobcats lounging on her porch. "They hunt, they roam, they do everything wild. Bobcats do. They just choose to do it here, and they choose to include me in their territory." The most remarkable moment came on a cold December morning almost a year after the accident. Emily was having her coffee on the porch when she heard a commotion near the back fence. Through her binoculars, she saw a guardian facing off against a coyote that had somehow gotten through the fence. Brave was behind her, his bad leg making him slower, more vulnerable. Without thinking, Emily grabbed her rifle and headed toward them. But before she could get halfway there, she witnessed something incredible. Guardian, barely 2/3 the size of the coyote, stood her ground, every hair on end, making herself look as large as possible. She screamed, a bone-chilling sound Emily had never heard from her before. When the coyote took a step forward, Guardian launched herself at it with such ferocity that the larger predator turned and fled, scrambling back through the hole it had made in the fence. Guardian chased it to the fence line, then returned to Brave, checking him over just as she had that day on the highway. When Emily reached them, both bobcats looked at her with what she could only describe as trust. They allowed her to check them for injuries. There were none, and followed her back to the house while she called someone to repair the fence. She protected him, Emily told Margaret over the phone that night. Just like she did on the highway, she'd die for him, I think, and he'd do the same for her. Margaret said, "You saved something special, Dr. Carter. Not just 2 lives, but a bond that most folks would say doesn't exist in wild animals." As the years passed, Brave and Guardian became local celebrities of sorts. Wildlife photographers came to document. Researchers studied their unique bond, and local schools brought children to learn about wildlife conservation. The bobcats tolerated the attention with surprising grace, though they would disappear into the property's wild areas when they'd had enough. Emily never tried to tame them further, respecting their wildness while providing them safety. They never became pets, but they became something else. Companions, perhaps, wild souls who chose to share their lives with the human who had saved them. On quiet evenings, Emily would sit on her porch, watching the 2 bobcats play, or groom each other, or simply lie together, watching the sunset. Guardian's head often rested protectively across Brave's back, just as it had that day on the highway. And sometimes when the light was just right and the world was still, Emily could swear she saw them looking at her with something like gratitude in their wild yellow eyes. "You saved each other," she would whisper to them. "I just gave you the chance." The story of the bobcat siblings spread far beyond Texas, touching hearts around the world. It challenged what people thought they knew about wild animals and their capacity for love and loyalty. Scientists debated whether it was instinct or something more that drove Guardian to protect her injured brother. But for those who had witnessed it, Margaret, Officer Reeves, Jake, and especially Emily, there was no question. Love exists in the wild. It may look different from human love, but it's no less real, no less powerful. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness it and play a small part in preserving it. Years later, when Emily was asked to speak at veterinary conferences about wildlife rehabilitation. She would always end with the same words. We think we're saving them, but sometimes they save us, too. Brave and Guardian taught me that the bonds between animals can be just as strong as any human relationship. They showed me that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a tiny bobcat standing guard over her injured brother on a dangerous highway. And sometimes it's having the wisdom to recognize something precious and doing everything in your power to protect it. The two bobcats lived out their lives on Emily's property, never separated, always together. Guardian never stopped watching over. Brave and Brave never stopped following his sister with complete trust. They remained wild, but they also remained connected to the humans who had recognized their bond and honored it. When Margaret Whitfield passed away at the age of 82, her obituary mentioned many things. Her 40 years of teaching, her 3 children, her 7 grandchildren, her volunteer work at the local library. But it also mentioned the day she stopped on Highway 287 and refused to leave 2 injured bobcat kittens, an act of compassion that led to a story that touched thousands of lives. Officer Reeves, now a captain, still tells the story to new recruits, using it as an example of how sometimes protecting and serving extends beyond human citizens. Jake Morrison went on to open his own wildlife rehabilitation center, inspired by what he'd witnessed with Brave and Guardian. And Emily, she continues to care for wildlife, but she's never encountered another pair quite like Brave and Guardian. They remain unique in her experience, a testament to the mysteries of the natural world and the bonds that can form between the most unlikely souls. On her porch, the old swing still cacks in the wind. And sometimes on quiet mornings, Emily still expects to see 2 forms curled up there, one protectively draped over the other, wild hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Proof that love knows no boundaries, not species, not instinct, not even the divide between wild and civilized. The Bobcat story reminds us all that, in a world that often seems harsh and unforgiving, acts of love and loyalty exist everywhere, even on a dusty Texas highway where a small guardian angel in fur refused to abandon the one she loved most. It's a reminder that we all have the capacity to be guardians for those who need us, and that sometimes the smallest acts of refusing to give up can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. And in the end, that's what matters most. Not that we fully understand the depth of the bond between Brave and Guardian, but that we recognized it, honored it, and gave it the chance to flourish. In doing so, we proved that humanity at its best can be a guardian, protecting the precious and irreplaceable bonds that make life worth living, whether they exist between humans or in the wild hearts of 2 bobcat siblings who refuse to let go of each other.